The Sacramento Historic City Cemetery, also known as Old City Cemetery, has around 44 acres of land, though other sources say that the real estate is between 28 and 36 acres. The Sacramento Historic City Cemetery is designed like a Victorian garden and is a lovely final resting place for over 25,000 people. Another source says that it was more like 36,000 people, with lots of hard work from volunteers. Plants, flowers, and bushes have been added during its ongoing restoration process to bolster and enhance its beauty. There are 3 major dedicated garden areas. Historic Gold Rush era roses are found in historic rose gardens, Brunner and Cadwallader areas. Perennial plants are found in the Hamilton Square area. Native plants are found near Veterans sections E and F. Notable people of Sacramento, as well as early settlers from all over the world, were laid to rest here. Captain John A. Sutter Jr., Sacramento City founder E.B. Crocker and family, Mark Hopkins, railroad man, William Stephen Hamilton, son of Alexander Hamilton, 3 California governors, and many of the earliest elected mayors of Sacramento are some of the well-known people of their time who are buried in this beautiful cemetery. Normal citizens were also buried here, some in family plots and others in mass graves, depending on how they passed, and/or in what financial condition their families were in at the time of their death. Besides individual families and well-known people, there are many group plots that have the individual graves of the Pioneer Association Masons, Independent Order of Odd Fellows, Volunteer Firemen, the Improved Order of Red Men, the state government, survivors of the Donner Party, plus Civil War and other military veterans, some who gave their all and others who lived to a ripe old age. History. The Sacramento City Cemetery, popularly called the Old City Cemetery, came into being after Captain John Sutter donated 10 acres of land for this purpose in 1849. This donation to the city of Sacramento was called the City Ordinance of December 1849. The city was growing, and the old informal private cemetery that had been established near Sutter's Fort had a tendency to flood because it was too close to the American River. The Sacramento City Cemetery was landscaped in the Victorian style, which was very popular in the mid-1800s. It opened its doors just in time for the onslaught of over 600 bodies really needing to be put to rest quickly in a mass grave when the huge Asiatic cholera epidemic hit Sacramento in 1850. One source reported, on October 8th, a passenger on the New World, a ship docked in Sacramento, emerged and collapsed on the wharf, sparking an epidemic that killed 800,100 people in less than 3 weeks. It was thought that the bodies of the epidemic victims were still lethal sources of the disease, and they needed to be buried quickly. This epidemic has the dubious distinction of killing the most attending physicians, 17 in number out of 80 physicians on the front lines fighting the disease. Except for a few, these doctors also wound up in a mass grave in the current cemetery. While some were quickly buried in a mass grave at the old cemetery by Sutter's Fort as well, they too were eventually moved at some point to Sacramento City Cemetery or East Lawn Memorial Park because of the problem with flooding from the American River. For some reason, no one marked exactly where these victims were buried. In 1852, a monument to them was placed on an area that was originally designated for the unknown indigent, but not in the correct spot even close to where all these folks were buried, probably because more dirt was already pushed over the mass graves to make new spots for others to be buried. Some theorize the mass grave is perhaps under the section for the war dead and other veterans from the Civil War and other wars, though no one knows for sure. After its 1849 founding, more land was added to expand the areas for burial, and ended with the generous donation by the benevolent Margaret Crocker, who donated the final acreage on the hill. At this point, there were 60 acres of land in the Sacramento City Cemetery. As the years went by, some of the land being used already for grave sites was sold. Bodies already laid to rest were moved before the pavement was rolled for a street, Broadway, shrinking the cemetery to its current size, which is still a sizable plot of real estate. Unfortunately, as the years rolled by, the cemetery filled up. Many of its residents who came from families that were long dead became unfamiliar to Sacramento's newer citizens. Long-term neglect by authorities became an unfortunate reality. This seems to be more likely to happen if a city is left in charge of a full cemetery. Probably city money was needed in other areas. This led to acts of disrespect and ravages of vandalism that toppled and maliciously marred many of the city cemetery's beautiful old stones and monuments. Yikes. This wasn't good either. Manifestations. The Sacramento City Cemetery is well known for its numerous hauntings. With the exception of a few cases, the identities of most of the spirits found here are unknown, but below are possible reasons for the restlessness of entities. People who die suddenly, unexpectedly, and or in a dramatic way sometimes aren't ready to leave this world just yet, for a variety of reasons such as concerns, blaming, or disappointment in selves, not happy about their deaths being too soon. May Woolsey, she was a 12-year-old girl who was close to her parents, that died in 1879 from encephalitis. May contacted her very distraught parents through a medium to tell them that she wasn't dead, but survived in spirit and was waiting for them on the other side in the spirit world. This must have comforted her parents somewhat, but they couldn't bear to give her things and toys away, yet couldn't bear to look at them either. So her parents put May's trunk of things and toys in a wall, and just sealed it up. Imagine the surprise of the current owners of her family's house when they discovered this trunk, while the wallet was hidden and was being removed in a remodeling effort. May's trunk and things are now in a Sacramento museum. Railroad engineer hero William Brown. He was able to save hundreds of lives by uncoupling the passenger train from the engine, but died himself, still trying to stop it as it plunged into the water. Some dole threw the wrong switch, sending his train onto the ferry wharf. When they pulled the train out, he was still clutching the controls, trying to stop the engine. He died trying. The entity of firemen, killed on the job, fighting a fire. People who are buried anonymously and forgotten by neglect, by omission, or disrespected in some way, like having their headstone broken, are sometimes restless, looking for recognition or remembrance to be put in place. No one knows today exactly where all the mass graves are located, and their individual names are lost forever. It is too bad that they didn't make a marker listing all the names of those located in the mass grave, like the one found at Deerfield Burial Grounds, or the much larger memorial found at the World Museum of Mining, Orphan Girl Mine. The city of Sacramento dropped the ball, but this was common in other places where large epidemics killed a lot of people. When graves are built upon or paved over, or something else is put on top of graves, this adds insult to the injury and causes restlessness and annoyance. The unmarked mass graves were not only not properly marked, but were completely buried and now are under the cemetery and other graves. People whose earthly remains are moved and or disturbed or desecrated sometimes are confused and wander, looking for their headstone. Sometimes moving into the closest building. Some remains from the other cemetery were dug up and moved to this one, and put in a mass grave. Other graves were moved off the Sacramento City Cemetery land that was sold for the making of the road, Broadway, and buried somewhere else in this cemetery.